The Charlotte Hornets finally do something. They have traded Terry Rozier to the Miami Heat in exchange for Kyle Lowry and a protected 2027 first-round pick. We are going to break it all down here live on the Locked On Hornets podcast. This is a live edition because this is breaking news. Information could change. Just want to warn everybody about that at the time. And no Walker Mail on this show because he is preparing his episode on WFNZ of the Wes and Walker Show. So without further ado, the chat is hungry for some content right now. Let's do it. Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
This is Locked On Hornets. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets. That's guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On Hornets to get started. Thanks so much for making Locked On Hornets your first listen every day. We are free and daily wherever you get podcasts, including on YouTube, where we are live right now. Topo talking about this breaking news. Terry Rozier being traded to the Miami Heat before the deadline. And we've got a lot to dig into here. I'm Doug Branson. You can catch more of my work on my substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. Walker Mail, who is usually the host and would usually bring this show in, is prepping a show on WFNZ right now. We have already done an episode of Locked On Hornets. We recorded it. It will go up on YouTube after this live goes down. And that episode was us getting this breaking news, celebrating an amazing, incredible Hornets win against the Minnesota Timberwolves, best team in the West, best team in the NBA by record, and on a 62-point night from Karl Anthony Towns. It was amazing. That episode is going to publish. Make sure to check that out. But now we're going to spend about a half hour talking about this trade and the details of this trade, which might evolve as the Hornets continue on marching towards the trade deadline. But right now, here's what we know. As of 11:33 Eastern Time, the Hornets have traded Terry Rozier to the Miami Heat. The deal is for Kyle Lowry and a 2027 lottery-protected first-round pick that, if it doesn't convey in 2027, would become a 2028 unprotected first-round pick. Now, Kyle Lowry is on an expiring $29.6 million deal. Terry Rozier is owed $24.9 million next season and $26.6 million the following season. Is this a good deal for the Charlotte Hornets? I think that's going to be the question on everyone's mind, although I don't even know if it's going to be a question because I think people are going to divide immediately and answer that for themselves. Some thinking, yes, if you get a first-round pick for Terry Rozier, even if it has protections in 2027, look, the Heat, older team, a lot of veterans on that team that could move on or even retire at this point. Are they going to be able to keep it going and contend all the way into 2027? Possibly not. And then if they jump into the lottery in 2027, then all of a sudden 2028 rolls around and you might have an unprotected pick that has the possibility of being anything. Could be a number 1 overall pick in 2028. But then on the other side, you have folks saying, you only got one first-round pick for Terry Rozier, who has contributed so much to this team, given his 100% heart and soul, been one of the leading scorers on this team consistently, and is, according to Synergy, the second most efficient scorer in the pick and roll this season. You had multiple teams inquiring about him. We heard rumors about the Lakers, possibly Golden State, rumors flying everywhere, and you trade Terry Rozier into a division rival, and you only come away with a first-rounder and an expiring contract in Kyle Lowry. Here's where I stand. I went on WFNZ last week on Walker's show, and I said if they get a first-round pick for Terry Rozier, you take it. Because everything that I had heard and read in the rumors for Terry Rozier for the past couple of seasons, this is not just something that came along all of a sudden. the Hornets have been getting calls and calling about Terry Rozier for multiple seasons now. And none of those reports did I get any indication, and none of the conversations that I heard Jake Fisher have, did I get any indication that there were multiple first-round picks associated with Terry Rozier. So I thought if you could get one first-rounder, that would be solid value. And I think what's interesting is that the pick becomes an unprotected pick only 1 year after it would initially convey, which typically on these deals you see that become realities multiple years after. It would start as, lottery protected first 2 seasons, and then third season it becomes unprotected. Not often does it convey unprotected immediately. So what I would sort of speculate happened is that the Hornets were looking to move Terry Rozier, and multiple teams came along and said, well, we'll give you multiple second-round picks. We'll give you an expiring contract. What do you say? And the Hornets said, no, he's been too good for us for too long. We have to do expiring deal and unprotected first-rounder. And then Miami said, okay, we'll do unprotected after the second year, and we'll do protected in the first year, and then you've got a deal. If I were to speculate how that kind of deal would come together, that's what makes the most sense to me. And why 2027? Well, the Heat already owed a 2025 or 2026 pick, depending on how the protections shake out, to Oklahoma City. And so this was really the first opportunity they would have to acquire a first-round pick from Miami, and here you go. So here's the thing. I understand from a fan perspective why you would be disappointed if, first of all, that the Hornets moved Terry Rozier at all, because he was, in the absence of LaMelo Ball, and he's been very absent lately, in the absence of LaMelo Ball, Terry Rozier has stepped his game up tremendously and really been one of the few entertaining things to watch over the past couple of seasons. And when Scary Terry had it going, he was a clutch scoring machine that could keep you out of games and rarely took you out of games, except maybe in a portion of last season when he was trying to do too much. He and Kelly Oubre hero ball because they were desperate for wins and didn't have LaMelo Ball. And so I can see how you would be disappointed in that. And then I could see how then you would flip that into, well, he was worth more than a first-round pick. The problem is that the way we value players on a team that has not contended for a while is going to be different than how NBA teams value that same player because they haven't made the playoffs. Because Terry Rozier didn't particularly play very well in those 2 blowout play-in losses. There's a different universe in which he, was the star of the show in that game against Atlanta, and they made a play-in run and made a playoff series run. Had they won a playoff series, certainly, but even if they had contended in a playoff series, and Terry Rozier had played well and been one of the leaders on that kind of team, well, James Borrego would still be the head coach probably, and you probably could have generated more value for Terry Rozier on a trade market in that situation. But because Terry had the extra years, and they're big numbers, 24.9 and 26.6. And that last year was partially guaranteed, but it was only like $2 million difference in the partial guarantee. So it wasn't like half his contract or anything. And the Hornets get an opportunity to take on an expiring deal of their own in Kyle Lowry. And so the next question is, what do they do with that Kyle Lowry contract? Do you keep Kyle Lowry as a backup point guard option, or do you move that before February 8th? Woj certainly is maybe hinting towards that, saying that they're essentially not done moving, which is, again, none of this is a shocker. The fact that Terry Rozier is going to Miami, even though it's a division rival, not a shocker. We had gotten indications that was his preferred destination. He lives in Miami, spends a lot of time there in the offseason, brought the Hornets together in a pre-camp camp several years ago in Miami. So that's not a shocker. It's not a shocker that they bring back an expiring contract, because this is the first step in what could be a retool, could be a rebuild. How far are the Hornets going to go in terms of moving contracts? I think, do they move Gordon? Do they move PJ? Because really, from everything we've heard, the untouchables are LaMelo, Mark, Brandon. Not even Nick Smith Jr. is in that conversation as their other first-round pick. So everybody's on the table at this point except for those 3 guys. But how deep do they go in moving those contracts, and who do they bring back? That's what we're going to continue to pay attention to. A lot of action here on the chat. Topo, what's going on, everybody? And I know we were a little late getting on, had to get some technical stuff figured out and make sure that we had enough of the information here because these things change and evolve so quickly. And we've already done 1 show. I didn't want to have to do 3. So let's look at this chat. I'm scrolling. Deshaun saying, no way this was the best deal out there. Look, I mean, I don't blame anyone for not having 100% faith in this front office in a normal season, but certainly not in a season in which, this might not even be the front office next season. That's the difficult part about evaluating all of this. Where is this coming from? I don't know necessarily this is coming from like Mitch Kupchak. This has got to be a top-down sort of like new ownership saying, here's what we're going to go do. Here's what we would like you to get. Here's who we would like you to move. And here's how we're going to proceed from there. But yeah, it's difficult to trust a front office that might not be the front office next season. So, I mean, I understand that. And maybe we'll get news later on about a Godfather deal, but I don't think Danny Ainge was involved in any of this, so I don't think we're going to get that. I don't think Utah was in any of these conversations, so maybe not. But I think in my opinion, if you got a first-round pick for Terry Rozier, that was going to be a win. All right, scrolling before we hit the break. The core basketball sicko saying the core of Melo, Terry, Miles, PJ didn't work out. Couple of play-in blowouts. That's why new owners will break this core and build around Melo, Brandon, Mark, and Shea. Yeah, look, the building of this core began when Mitch Kupchak dealt Kemba Walker in a sign and trade for an exchange of second-round picks and Terry Rozier. And at the time, everyone thought, well, that's a sign and trade, but you really got nothing for Kemba Walker because Terry Rozier's numbers weren't that great coming out of Boston. Didn't know that he was going to evolve his game, improve his game as much as he did. It was an incredibly efficient scorer, raise his game even further. You are trading peak Terry right now. This is, and Terry's had some injury history with his ankles in the past and groin. And so you move him before a deadline and you avoid what's happened with Gordon now multiple seasons, him getting hurt before the deadline and killing any of his trade value. So there were a lot of conversations around Terry Rozier, and I feel like if you're going to trade with a division rival, this was probably peak deal. So, all right, we're keep those comments coming. But yes, this is the breaking down of that core, the admission that era was a failure for lots of reasons. Injuries, obviously, big factor. The Miles Bridges not being available for an entire season because of a felony domestic violence charge, that was a huge factor. Certain players not panning out in the draft that Mitch Kupchak drafted. I mean, the trade of Shea, Gilgeous-Alexander, the pick for Book Knight, the trade to get up to pick Kai Jones. I mean, a lot of those postmortems will be done later on, but this is the first step in that retool rebuild. All right, coming up on this live edition of the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
More of your questions and comments. We do have a full episode coming later on this win against Minnesota, so we'll talk more about that. I want to get in to what Terry Rozier meant to this team a little bit later in the show. Talk more about Kyle Lowry in this upcoming segment. That's all coming up on the Locked On Hornets podcast. And I don't know if any of my tech is going to cooperate with me, so I'll just bounce right into this read about FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. Find bets in the new Explore tab and make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays. Might want to get in on some Brandon Miller action at this point because he is all of a sudden He was already starting, but I mean, now solidified as you're starting to for the future. And as guys get healthier, there was a question, would he remain in the starting lineup? I think that question is now answered as they move Terry Rozier. He will remain in the starting lineup for the rest of the season. Much, much more here in the FanDuel app. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the Locked On Podcast Network and official partner of the NFL as well. Okay, so I'm scrolling through the chat and someone saying going to be very hard to replace 24 points. Yeah, he was a 20-point average scorer his entire tenure here in Charlotte. And so there are going to have to be multiple guys who pick up that slack. And you're already starting to see that. I mean, Miles Bridges is taking a ton of shots. He's just not scoring very efficiently. You're going to see more Nick Smith Jr. You're already starting to see a little bit more of him as time went on. You're going to see him coming off the bench more and more and probably being asked to take more shots. Cody Martin will return soon and will take some of that responsibility as well. But all of the guys that I'm mentioning, apart from NSJ, who I think scored pretty effectively, it's just some of the other aspects of his game that have to improve because he's a rookie. But a lot of the guys that I'm mentioning, and you can throw PJ Washington into this, guys that would have to take on more shot-making responsibility, to this point in the season haven't proven that they can do it at anywhere close to the efficiency level that Terry Rozier did. And so that's where the struggle will be, to find that and to find what he could do in pick and roll. Terry Rozier, according to Synergy, second best in the NBA at efficiently scoring out of the pick and roll. More of that flows to LaMelo Ball. Problem is, LaMelo Ball has had his share of injury issues in past seasons and this season. How much more times has he missed this season? So you're going to have to figure all that out. That is the responsibility now that lands on Steve Clifford's desk. But let's talk about Kyle Lowry, who fell out of favor in Miami. And it was as obvious that Terry Rozier was going to get traded as it was that Kyle Lowry was going to get traded. Was not a fan favorite in Miami. Didn't feel like anyone thought he bought into the Heat culture. Well, I've got good news for Kyle Lowry. It's not how the Charlotte Hornets have done it, if he remains a Hornet. There's none of that Heat culture stuff here. I would say the culture here has been almost the bizarro Heat culture. It's been opposite. There hasn't been an immense amount of accountability. The Hornets have played hard. Young players played hard. It's that discipline thing that I think has escaped them for a long time. And that's by virtue of the fact that they've remained young for many years and tried to build a young core and keep that young core together without introducing any kind of veteran NBA Finals or NBA playoffs experience into that mix. That I think you've had some of the culture issues that if they do move some of those guys, eventually you're going to, hopefully they've learned that lesson. Hopefully new ownership group has learned that lesson that you can build a young core and that's all fine and good. But if you don't inject that young core with some kind of, and that could come from the bench in terms of the head coach, but typically we see that happening with players, and Oklahoma City has done that. They brought in veterans to match with some of their young core. So we'll have to see that. But Lowry, the options for the Hornets, keep him as a backup point guard option. You signed Ish you signed Ish very late, not even late in the offseason. You signed him during the season. And he's been good mid-range scorer, has decent passer, effort defender, but not, but he's older. He was thinking about retirement before he came to the Charlotte Hornets. So, do you keep Kyle Lowry as a backup point guard option to take some pressure off of LaMelo Ball now that he's probably going to be even more responsible for scoring without Terry Rozier, more minutes for LaMelo Ball? Do you, take some of the pressure off, allow him to rest maybe on a few back-to-backs as this season has now shifted from playoff aspirations or play-in aspirations to no aspirations? Or do you trade him prior to the February 8th deadline? What would you get for Kyle Lowry? Probably, 1 second-round pick, multiple second-round picks. You might have to take on bad money if you move Kyle Lowry. And the other option would be either to buy him out or just keep him and let that contract expire. On the buyout front, I don't think Kyle Lowry, if he wants to play for a contender, if he's bought out, according to Bobby Marks, he can't play for a team under the first or second tax apron, which are a lot of your sort of championship contenders. And I'm not sure that those championship contenders are really even interested in what Kyle Lowry has to offer at this point. But if there was any kind of idea of that happening, then that would take out some of the incentive for Kyle Lowry to be bought out. So then I think the most likely option at this point is trading him prior to February 8th. And again, we got some indication from Adrian Wojnarowski that the Hornets are not done. And David Walker on the chat saying, oh, Kyle Lowry knows all about that culture now. Yeah, the culture kicked him out. He got kicked out of the club. I mean, it booted him. So he knows what it is, and he wasn't very interested in it. So let's see. Someone, it looks like a Raptors fan here saying we could take Lowry. He still has some love in Toronto. Yeah, would they want to clear books like that? Would that make any sense for Toronto, who also seems to be in somewhat of a rebuild? Would that make sense for them? Or, do they have now they do have some front office talent that could go into an offseason with a little cap space and make some moves, and they have a championship under their belt. So maybe they have a little bit. It is super cold in Toronto, but maybe they do have a little bit of extra sway when it comes to free agency that the Charlotte Hornets wouldn't necessarily have. That's always the argument against clearing the books, right? Is that you clear the books for what? What do you clear the books for? Are the Hornets really going to be contenders? What front office? We don't know. Is it going to be Mitch Kupchak? Is it going to be some other front office? Are they going to spend money to bring in a Bob Myers level executive, or are they going to try to find some up-and-comers and save a little bit of money when it comes to where they could really get the checkbook out? They decide, nah, we're not going to do that for the general manager. So for what? Are you looking to turn this team into somebody that can go out in free agency and try to steal someone like they did with Al Jefferson? Or are you looking to build a young core and just see that through and try to make some draft hits with a new general manager? And make some trade hits and bring in a veteran later on. Not at this trade deadline, but a future one. Turtle Master saying trade for Kuminga or Markkanen. Yeah, look, there are some names that remain on this market. And that's when you get into, are the Hornets interested in a rebuild? Because the Hornets not being done can mean a lot of different things. Are they interested in a rebuild, which would mean taking on bad money, bringing in assets, moving PJ for seconds, moving, on down the line, moving Gordon's contract for multiple years of another contract and bringing back more, maybe future first rounders, super protected first rounders that eventually become second rounders. Is that what you're interested in? And you get bad at the same time and get your own draft assets? Or are you interested in a retool and you selectively make trades that would bring in players that you're actually interested in investing in future years? That's what we have to pay attention to with some of these future deals that come out. Fast Break report saying it's so they have future cap space for a Miles Bridges extension. Possibly, but we're also seeing a lot of rumors that Miles Bridges is in trade discussions. He could be one of the players that is moved as well. If a team like Detroit or some of the other teams that have been rumored to be interested in Miles, if Miles is interested in joining them, because remember, he has essentially what is a no trade clause because he signed the qualifying offer. So he would have to agree to the deal. But if there is a deal that he agreed to, would a team want to kind of sneak in and not have to and at least have an edge in competing for Miles Bridges, in that Miles Bridges could come to a new team and see what he was getting involved in, build relationships with players. They wouldn't have any contractual edge. They wouldn't have any like bird rights situations, but they would have a little bit of emotional edge if you traded for Miles Bridges and then went to make him a deal in free agency. So there are a lot of different ways that story could end. But certainly one of those ways is the Hornets making him an offer, something that they've wanted to do for years now, and didn't, obviously, because he had a felony domestic violence charge. And so, look, I've got no indication from this ownership group that they particularly, he wouldn't be on the team right now if they cared about that. So I don't think that's going, the only thing that's going to affect the Hornets making Bridges a deal in the offseason is how much money do they want to invest and how many wins do they want to go after in the next couple of seasons. If they want this to be a retool and they feel like they have an inside track on Miles Bridges and there aren't other teams willing to give him a max type deal, but they played hardball with him in this past offseason, and that's why he signed the qualifying offer. So we'll have to see. So a lot of people, Paul George is not leaving the Clippers. Get over it. Nick Richards could go to the Suns. Look, everything's on the table. Nick Richards is interesting, right? He's injured right now, dealing with an ankle injury. But a lot of teams could look to stock up on backup bigs as they prepare their playoff roster. That's always a popular move. So that is definitely a name to pay attention to. So let's move on to the next segment. I want to talk about Terry Rozier, what he meant to the Charlotte Hornets, and talk about where he lands on some of these Hornets all-time lists, and get some of your final questions and comments. That's coming up on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
But this episode is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. With the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball. Do it while you can. Football is almost over. From the Specials League, it's a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you can get LeBron James and Travis Kelce, who is still he's still alive in the NFL playoffs right now, at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. So PrizePicks, a really fun way to get involved with the game. Want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy. That's what the Hornets are doing right now. They're rebooting. PrizePicks has a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half, doesn't return for the second, that player is beep boop rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code LockedOnNBA, all one word, for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Okay, let's roll along. I'm going to take a sip of coffee here. Let's roll along and talk about Terry Rozier, what he meant to this team. As I said, he was acquired for Kemba Walker. He represented the end of that era, and it was an emotional end as Kemba Walker exited the franchise with so many of the franchise's records, particularly the scoring records. He did a lot of that in his time in Charlotte. And so then they give Terry the big deal, and he improves every year and surprised a lot of us and turned a lot of us into Terry. I don't know that there were a lot of Terry haters, but there were a lot of people that were like, I don't know, it's Terry Rozier, whatever. And he proceeded to absolutely give everything he had of himself to this franchise and lift the franchise up in particular moments when they could have just completely rolled over and been a misery franchise. He kept us from being a misery franchise. There's been a lot of disappointment. There's been a lot of bad luck. It's why we're sickos. But it could have been historically bad. It could have been Detroit Pistons this season level bad, which really could have left a severe scar on the fan base, more so than they're already scarred. And I think he represented that. Here's where he landed in the record books. He finished 6th in field goals made, third in three-pointers made, 10th in assists, 10th in steals, 5th in points, 4th in points per games at 20, 10th in usage percentage, and 10th, according to Basketball Reference, in value over replacement player. Your top guy in that is Kemba Walker at 24.8, then Gerald Wallace, Muggsy Bogues, Larry Johnson, Del Curry, Anthony Mason, Baron Davis, Glenn Rice, Marvin Williams, Terry Rozier. He's in the elite company in Charlotte Hornets history. Whatever you thought about him, it was always difficult when they were in play-in contention to look at the backcourt and say, man, love LaMelo Ball, love Terry Rozier. Both these guys playing together seems like a defensive disaster. Can they ever win anything? And then Terry would miss some time. LaMelo would step up. The team would play better defensively. LaMelo would go out. They'd bring another point guard in like Dennis Smith Jr. Team would play better defensively. Terry Rozier would show out. So it was always this weird situation where, man, both those guys together, not going to result in anything great. One guy, but then you look at the one guy and you say, man, this guy is super talented and is fun to watch and is Scary Terry and turns it on at the right time and provides an entertainment value. This is always going to be viewed differently if you watch occasionally from home and care about LaMelo Ball exclusively or another player exclusively versus you're a season ticket holder and you go to games or you watch them every night on Bally's. Because those folks, those latter folks, are going to be disappointed that they don't get to watch Terry Rozier anymore because they got to see him do special stuff. And he raised his game to a completely different level this season. The level of difficulty on the shots that he's hit this season was incredible. The circus layups, the stuff that he does that you take for granted because he did it so much. And I'm glad that some of these, career stats, when you look at them, you have to recognize Terry Rozier being in that same company as some of these other players. So let's end today, although we do have another episode coming up, so make sure to check that out on YouTube. But let's end today with some comments. Scrolling. Lots of conversations happening here. 50, 40, 86, more steals and fouls, and 5-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, nowhere near the same caliber or efficiency. Haley saying, but who would want to take a $30 million Hayward contract when he can't play? I mean, yeah. I don't see a trade happening that is anything but pennies on the dollar. But there are some needs for this team that they could fill player-wise. They still need depth at the center position. Both of their centers are out. They're injured right now. If Mark Williams has to have back surgery, then all of a sudden the center position becomes a huge question mark for the Hornets again. They still need more defense. They still need more physicality. They have length. They don't necessarily have size. Shake Milton was like a bowling ball last night for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Nobody could stop him. You're hoping Brandon Miller puts on size and strength, but you also need to add that at some point. Scrolling. Get Hayward as far from Charlotte as possible. PJ is inconsistent. Look, a lot of negative vibes around the Hornets right now, so it's not a surprise that this ownership group, who probably is paying attention somewhat to the conversation around the team, would look to, move more of these guys than not, because you just want to reset the conversation. A lot of the conversation around PJ is pretty set. A lot of the conversation around Miles, as divided as it is set. So it's not a surprise that they're wanting to move on from these eras. Renisha saying, I like PJ Washington, but he's never been a leading scorer, so the fact that you're expecting to be one now is crazy. There are a lot of conversations happening within these conversations that I'm peeking into. You guys are very, very emotional right now. It's an emotional day when someone that has done as much for the franchise as Terry has gets moved. Mr. Elevation saying, we need size and shooting. No question. This team was already struggling to shoot over, they would have these bursts like they did against Minnesota, but on the whole, we're struggling to score from outside. They're going to need to address that. So I think that's going to do it. This has been a great live topo, and we will be back with you tomorrow. Walker and David are going to talk about their thoughts on this, and stay tuned because coming up on YouTube and on the podcast feed, on the audio podcast feed, is going to be our thoughts on an incredible win against Minnesota and our final look at Terry Rozier. So thanks for making us your first listen. Now check out Locked On Sports Today live on YouTube. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Thanks so much for joining us and supporting this show. Go to everyhornetsboxscore.com for more of my thoughts on this Minnesota win. And make sure you listen today, 12 to 3, to, actually it's on right now, to Walker Mail and on the Wes and Walker Show for his thoughts. Until then, go Hornets, go America, let's swarm Charlotte.